Hello and welcome to the 2x2. Here today, I am lucky to be joined by Wes Wheless, who is the founder of Design My IP. Wes is a former consultant who now helps other consultants, and we'll get into why he believes that that's a good choice to make. But he does it in a really interesting way. One of the things I think that we all struggle with is how do you very simply help a client understand the type of problem you solve and kind of what specific knowledge and expertise you bring to the table. And Wes has designed I'll call it a product here, but it's an intellectual headshot, something that can very simply help other consultants show visually kind of what they do and why they are special and unique. So Wes, welcome to the 2x2.
Thank you. No, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So Wes, you are a reformed consultant who has decided to become a consultant to help consultants.
Yeah, reformed is funny. No, I think about it as like a boomerang consultant. So yeah, I started my career at BCG and now I'm back in consulting as an independent, and add the extra layer of I serve other independent consultants. So very deep in the matrix in that way, but yeah, it's as all things, it starts and ends with consultants. But yeah.
What did you do in between that drove you to return?
Yeah, so I started at BCG. I was in their Miami office, which was very new back then. I was in the first associate class of the Miami office, which I think is like 100 people now. So it's kind of funny to see how it's grown. But I was there for a few years, followed a partner over to Carnival Corp, so the big cruise conglomerate. So they were also in Miami, basically doing internal consulting there. Spun back to business school, went to Kellogg. Use that as a time to pivot into tech. My idea was to find some intersection of tech and travel, and I found it at Expedia. So joined Expedia, did my internship at their London office, which was a fun place to start, and then took the full-time offer here in Seattle, which I didn't know it was going to be an 11-year stint here in Seattle, but I thought it was just going to be a couple. But now here I am. Let's see. At Expedia, I was doing mainly product management work. I had an interesting role at the end of my time at Expedia, which was I built a course and traveled around and taught a course to other product managers on a technical topic around internationalization, which honestly turned in, I liked that teaching and that distillation aspect of even more than product management itself. So when I was laid off from Expedia during COVID, I found a startup that was building basically like the masterclass, but for the tech community, specifically product managers. And so that's what I ended up doing, was sitting with a lot of tech execs, distilling their stories down into courses that we then sold as a premium membership. That company was called Reforge. If anyone in the audience is a product person, you might have heard of them. And then when I was laid off from them in 2022, it was time to go out on my own and see if I could take a little bit more control. So I started doing exactly what I was doing at Reforge, but independently, which was ghostwriting courses for tech execs, essentially as content marketing. And did that for a while until, I don't know, there were some holes in the business model, which we can get into if you'd like. But then it was kind of a turning point of like, okay, well, who else could I serve doing this very interesting thing of distilling knowledge into packages or something that can be monetized. And I was working with a coach at the time, and she told me, she was like, Wes, I work with a lot of independent consultants. A lot of them could use some help synthesizing their expertise into something they could use your skill set. And so I decided to go down that road and see where it took me.
How did you find your first consultant client?
Yeah, first consultant client out on my own. Yeah, that was, I was very lucky. It was inbound. Reforge, that startup had a kind of a clout around it. So people in that world knew the quality of content that we had created. And so someone from that ecosystem had reached out after, I don't know, at that time in 2022, it was the time where there was a lot of layoffs going on. If you remember, people were passing around layoff lists. And so it was I was very publicly available. And so they came to me and said, we want to build something like that. Can you build us a Reforge type course, but for our executives that we can put out into the market? So that's where it started. It was maybe 2 or 3 months after I was laid off. So it was relatively quick.
And how has this evolved since? So this is almost 3 years in starting with courses. And now I know What I think you've been able to do is distill and distill and distill and distill and to get to something that is very short yet incredibly powerful. Kind of talk us through the iterations of what you've done and kind of what you learned about what works and helping consultants position themselves and explain what they do to clients.
Yeah. Well, when I first pivoted into serving solo consultants, I'll tell you, I was selling a pretty heavy service. I had it, and this is, well, I've seen this trend happen with other clients that I work with, but I had this on paper, it seemed like a really good service. I was like, well, let me sit with people and let me take them through a 3-month process of let's download all your expertise. Let's build IP around it. Let's build a service. Let's go and get you speaking gigs. Let me just be white glove to get you from I'm going out on my own to up and out to the races. And got some nice visuals built around it. It was called the Signature Service Intensive, all of that. And I'll be honest, it's just it didn't sell very well. I had a few clients, but not that many, and certainly not enough to sustain me. And so over time, it was okay, well, what are the pieces of that really that people are asking for? And so I guess it was just at the beginning of this year that I started chopping that up into sprints. One was about, okay, well, first and foremost, what we need to do is figure out your niche. I've found out myself and through talking to a lot of other consultants that it's hard to get anywhere if you don't specialize, at least in some form. And then the second part is, all right, well, now that you've chosen a niche, how do you become known for that? And for me, I don't know how you do that besides going out and being known for your ideas. And a big way that you can do that is by distilling your expertise into IP and intellectual property for those who might not know. But that seems to be the scary piece for folks. I say the word IP, and like you said, the name of my company is Develop My IP, and I feel like people run the other direction. And I think the idea of IP brings up all this idea of, oh, I need a lawyer, or you're asking me to write a book or write a course or trademark, copyright, all of that. Really, when I think about IP for consultants, it's just very simply, it's a set of your unique insights synthesized into a shareable point of view. And that sounds like a mouthful, but really what I'm talking about is frameworks and visuals. And that's as far as you have to go from a starting point. And so now the majority of my business, I'm saying 90+%, is now working with solo consultants to build visuals that articulate their expertise.
Why do you think it's so hard for us to do this ourselves? I mean, I will say here, as a person who also is, not to be I'm amazing, but synthesis is the thing I'm good at. It is my superpower. Yet I really struggled for a long time with defining this in a very simple way about what problems I solve for our clients and getting that into a tight sentence, right? But even then, even a set of frameworks, I could have written 650 pages on it, volumes on it. Why do you think it's so hard to do it yourself?
Well, because even if the skill of synthesis is really well honed, it's very rare do we have to do it for ourselves. That's the new context. And before I go down that road, I even back up and say, you're coming at this, and I'm coming at this, and most of my clients are coming at this with decades of experience. We're talking about 10, 20, 30 years of domain expertise. So the question really is well, one, where do you even start? And then it's well, what do I leave out? And so I through the process of building visuals with folks, I see this almost every day of I'll do my best. It almost helps that I'm not as experienced as they are, because if I'm trying to explain it back to them visually, then it has to be quite simplified. And I'll return to them something kind of a very simple diagram structure, and then almost immediately they want to start annotating it and say, oh, we have to add in this edge case and this. And I have to keep saying, remember, the point is we need to get this across in a matter of seconds. You can always talk more about your expertise, but in terms of trying to get someone very quickly onboarded into the way that you see your domain and their problem, it takes a mirror to be able to play that back in a simplified manner.
Right. Across these 3 odd years that you've been doing this has also coincided quite nicely with what I'll call the great fractionalization. When COVID happened, we're 2025, this is September 2025 when we're recording this. I would say 3 years ago, certainly 4 years ago, the concept of a fractional executive was not a commonly known concept. Whereas I think now, particularly those people who are working in mid-market technology, private equity, it is quite ubiquitous. It's moved from just fractional CFO to CXO, many types of definitions of that. What have you seen in the growth of executive level or senior advisory level independent consultants or fractional executives over the course of these 3 years?
Yeah, well, definitely seeing more familiarization in the market. I feel like there's not as much explanation that needs to be done about what the fractional model is. Yeah, it's becoming a pretty I don't say household term, but like I think you know what I mean. I think I do see a bunch of questions about like who qualifies as a fractional. I think that some people have a hardline definition of, well, you have to have been in a CMO role before to be serving as a fractional CMO, which I think it really depends. I try not to get too caught up in the titles of things, but really just think about this as it's a packaging for you to self-deploy your expertise somehow. And I don't know, in some ways, I feel like all consulting is fractional, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're like part-time at some company, right? So yeah, I think the market's just getting a lot more familiar.
Yeah, I see a lot of variation in some, especially in some sub segments of fractional consulting, where it could mean anything from a senior manager to a true C-level executive. I think what I would recommend is like the importance of, even if you define yourself as a fractional executive, the importance of having a niche and having your own, you'll use the word IP, I'll call it a niche, I'll call it simply just having a problem with yourself, is incredibly important to distinguish yourself from the sea of other CXOs. I don't know, you're probably familiar with the group Fractionals United. They, prior to monetizing their product, they had over 15,000 members sign up within 18 months. I mean, 15,000 people calling themselves C-level is just not true C-level, right? Like, and that's fine, but it's become a term that's descriptive of a whole category of type of work. And it's, I don't know, I see a lot of people kind of struggling to go to market in that space because they're not really defining what it is and what they do, which is kind of, they can take a page out of the consultant playbook, where we know we have to solve a problem. We know we have to talk about specific expertise.
Yeah. Well, and just, I mean, going down that route, it's, you think of this in the buyer's mind. Like, I don't think a CEO wakes up and says, I need to hire a fractional CMO today.
Right.
Or I need to talk to a fractional CMO today. They say, our growth marketing has stalled out and we're really up a creek and I need to talk to someone like yesterday.
Yeah.
And like, that's how they want to. And then they ask their friends and their other founder friends of like, do you know anyone who's been in this situation in my vertical? And then all of a sudden a name pops up, and then that's where the conversation starts. But it's not because you've labeled yourself as a fractional. Again, like, fractional is it's a service model. It's a business model. It's a packaging. It's not a positioning, for sure.
Yeah. This is actually a question I have. I haven't asked you this before. No. You'll be able to answer it. If you're thinking about this variation in expertise level for anyone that's doing kind of this type of independent consulting or fractional work, you've got people who are 15 years of experience to 40 years of experience. Is there a place within that spectrum where you feel like, okay, this is the time when you really need to design your IP or to establish your point of view? Like, could you be a generalist and not need this as much? Like, when should someone start to think about, like, yes, this is what I need to do in order to make this, to distinguish myself or really make it a career?
There's two ways I can go with it. And maybe I'll say them quickly so you can remind me once I trail off on the other direction. But one is that IP development is an ongoing process. And so you should just start immediately and it will always continue to evolve. And the other one is, I would almost dare you to try to start to document IP as a generalist and see how far you get.
Yeah.
And that's really the problem, because it's one of the first things I do with my clients is, even before I'll even say yes to doing an IP builder with someone, is I ask them what their niche is, and we have a conversation about that. Because if we try to go down the route of building IP and you haven't really narrowed around a problem or an audience, you're going to end up with very generic IP that's just going to wash over and like blend into everything else. And so the real interesting IP, the real interesting visuals that I create with folks are interesting because they speak so specifically and they resonate emotionally with people that are going through something very specific. And you just lose a lot of that connection when you're trying to make something. You end up with these very generic slide looking things that are like, all right, here's the diagnostic, here's the problem, here's the solution, here's the remedy. You know, it's there's not a lot of insight in there. It's not until you go narrow that you find the gems that you really want to.
I mean, you could look at it, just riffing on this with you. You could look at it as saying the earlier you start doing this, the better, because the fewer options you actually have to say you can do something well. You know, if you're 30 years into your, so let me just use myself as an example. I have been independent consulting for almost 12 years. Before that, 8 of the prior 14 years was as a consultant. The amount of things I could say that this is a problem, like I could say I can valuably come in and solve this problem 10 years ago are fewer in number than the number I could say today. And that's just simply because at bats, right? But in my mid 30s, I was perfectly capable of solving a really interesting pricing problem, perfectly capable of looking at an offer stack or a merchandising stack. Like these are things I could do on repeat in my sleep. Add 10 more years of experience to that, and the waters get muddy. And it becomes even harder to say, you know, here is what I do, because it could be, you know, add the list of other things that we've done to that. So it is, I think it would be useful for someone to say, and if it probably is useful if you're a consultant or if you're just, you know, if you're a career employee, to say, these are the things I solve, this is how I solve them well, and kind of add things to your stack to keep that clarity as you move through your career.
Well, you remember, and you and I were both at BCG, so we can talk about it, but this happens at any other consulting firm, is like, what's the thing that you're supposed to do after a case finishes, right? You're supposed to sanitize everything, and then you're supposed to upload it so that it can be used again, and so that the partners can go and sell more projects about what we just did, and we don't have to recreate the wheel every time. If, as independents, there's no reason why we shouldn't be following that same process. I think what happens is, yes, we're busy, there's no accountability. You might think, oh, I'm never going to sell a project like this again. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, you have no record of what you've done except maybe a few decks.
Yeah, you find yourself digging through hundreds of pages of old decks in your Dropbox, looking for the way you did this one thing 5 years ago. I know, because I've done that a lot. Certainly true.
Well, and then also, let's not forget the value of it's great to be able to tell a story about a problem that you solve for one specific client, but taking that extra step of synthesizing it up one level to a framework that can be applied to any context, or at least to any client within your domain, your niche, like that's really where the value is. That's what people are bringing you in for, right? You're like, what did you learn over there? I can apply here, and it can help me avoid pitfalls and see around corners and all of that. Like that's what they're paying you for.
How do you advise people do that? Like, talk us through that situation. So let's say you've done this work, maybe you've done it a couple of times, you have this body of work. How do you start to move that to a framework that you can easily communicate, and then even perhaps becomes a repeatable method for you to apply?
Yeah. So when I start an IP Builder sprint with folks, the first thing I do is I send you a worksheet, and it looks very unassuming, but it gets deep pretty quickly. It's a lot about who are you helping? Of course, like basically what's your niche? Like who comes to you for help? What problems are they looking for you to solve? Why do they come to you, et cetera? Then it turns specifically into, all right, well, where specifically have you led clients to an aha moment? And then like digging deeper into that of like, what did you see that they didn't see? And like, what were you able to unlock by showing them? Or like, what did you put in place by showing them? Those things tend to be super ripe for visualization, because I know I already used the word X-ray vision, but I say that a lot is like, we are trained in our domains to go in and like things will pop out at us that they wouldn't pop out at other people. And so that's what you want to help your client orient around. And so that's something that's super ripe. The converse can be true too, of like, what's something, and particularly I work with some folks that are just coming out of corporate and trying to get started. I'll ask like, well, what were the things that you were always screaming about in corporate that no one would listen to you about, you know? And what was dismissed. Those things are also like, you're now out on your own and you can go like chart your own course to go take care of those and nip those when you're not dealing with all the bureaucracy of a corporate environment as a corporate employee. So like those are two paths you can go down to find some interesting elements that you can create assets out of that then can open up really deep conversations, particularly in the marketing and sales process before you're even onboarded a client.
That is I think it's a really astute observation about the corporate side of this. I mean, I know the ahas in the consulting, and for me, let me just go back there. The aha for me, I think a lot of us feel this, is there's a real dopamine rush with that. Like when you find that unlock and you see the missing piece to the puzzle, or you see the pattern that no one else saw, that for me is like why I do this work, because I love it. When I was in a corporate job, when I would have those same moments, I felt like I was banging my head against a table. And it was, I think, and I look back on that and I think those were actually the things that I am now good at solving, and people couldn't see it. And it made me absolutely insane. I think for those of you, so there are a lot of people, I think, in our readers, a lot of questions I get who are people curious or already moving into independent consulting from corporate jobs. That is a great piece of advice for them. Take that one down for those of you who are listening.
Well, and just to go one step further on that, it is funny when you make that switch. What I notice is that when you go from employee to consultant, it's like you actually jump from employee to expert. And like when you get called into a client's context, they're all excited because they've brought you in. You've convinced them that you are the expert, and you've proven your case too. But then when that aha hits you, you get that dopamine rush, sure. But then also everyone shuts up and listens. It's pretty incredible because you're still the same person and you're still seeing the same things, but the context is different. And it's actually a huge relief. And you're like, wow. I mean, it's just like, I know the feeling of feeling so stifled in that environment. And having that be lifted is, if you need another reason to go out solo.
Especially the people who are, and a lot of people that I talk to about this, they're women in their 40s, sometimes in their early 50s, and they're experiencing this for the first time. And how cool is that? Okay, I want to go back to something you were saying before about, and I want to get to the headshot because I think it's the simplest visualization of this. You're going through this process and helping people extract these nuggets. How do you make this so simple? Even when you say those nuggets, it's hard even for me to communicate it now verbally. How, maybe before I ask the how, why is visualization of these nuggets so important versus just having a talk track or being able to communicate it in a, people talk about speaking engagements or all of these other things, but verbal or written communication. Why is the visual so much more compelling?
Yeah, I think, well, let me just start by saying consultants, we talk a lot. We talk maybe too much, and it can be really hard to rein it in. And even with prepared talking points or talking points that you've internalized, it still can be overwhelming to a client. I like to remind people that let's not forget that when a client comes to you, they're in some form of distress.
Yeah.
They're dealing with a problem that they can't solve internally. They've probably tried 3 other things they're not going to cost them a good amount of money, like you are. And so they're stressed out. They're up against some sort of time pressure or even like personal pressure. And then you just trying to like rattle off insights isn't all that helpful in terms of structuring or relieving their urgency. Visuals do require an amount of distillation, and there is work involved to get things down to something that's super simplified and digestible. But when you do that and you produce something that can speak for itself in a matter of seconds, sometimes instantly, it gets you on their page. 2, it gives them some sort of frame of reference, some context, perhaps some language to start describing what they're feeling. And then it's a starting point for a conversation, something that's much deeper than, hey, look at me and look at all the things that I know from all the places that I've worked. You're saying, here's a depiction as simplified as possible of what I know that you're going through. Let's talk about it. And it's just a lot more of an approachable conversation and a much deeper one, ironically starting from something that's much more simplified.
So what are the elements of a great headshot for a consultant?
Yeah. Well, let me say that you talked about nuggets. Part of my process is, we go through that worksheet. We do a pretty open discovery session. As you're talking, I don't know how to really describe this, but I get kind of visions almost. This is not a mystic thing, but like as you're describing things, I can see like maybe a metaphor will click in my head, or something like, oh, if we could, maybe put that on a 2x2, like something like
This
that.
is your special sauce, by
Then
the way. The fact that you could do that, because that is a unique skill.
that, thank you. That is, yeah. And I think that speaks well to why I've kind of carved my service just around this now. But by the end of the first session, we have this landscape, which I call the visual narrative. And it goes through, there's 4 columns to it. I don't mind sharing it. It's pain, problem, solution, and service. So like what's the most resonant pain point that we could visually articulate for your buyer, and think about how we could visualize that. All right, what's the underlying problem that's causing that pain? What's some metaphor that we can use to really heighten heighten the awareness of that problem and help to explain why they're feeling the pain that they're feeling? Do the same thing for the solution, and then if you want to create a visual about how people can retain you, then some of my clients do that as well. But through any of those, it either will look like a visual metaphor or a framework. Typical consulting frameworks apply here. It's like process diagrams, 2x2s, time series, etc. I then do a rough draft of those. Clients come back and offer their feedback. We wordsmith things, throw out things that they don't think that their buyer would buy or prescribe to, and we go from there. But yeah, it's finding nuggets in each of those columns, and then thinking, what's the best way I can put this into a picture? And maybe even more importantly, particularly in visual metaphors, what's something that would catch attention that people don't see every day? So I have one that I created for, he's a fractional general counsel for B2B SaaS companies. And you can imagine him, he's like, this guy has a really sharp sense of humor, but he was like, let's do something that attacks the elephant in the room, which is that like my buyer's CEO, and all CEOs hate lawyers because they come in and they block sales, right? It's like they work so hard to get their SaaS sold, and then you run it through legal, and then all of a sudden the deal dies. And so we created, I don't know, it came to me, this visual metaphor. I wanted to show something that was like, what's something that has momentum, and then all of a sudden the momentum stops. It just came to me as like a ski jump. And so I just made a visual of a ski jump, and at the very end of it, just put a brick wall. It's just like, all right, well, that's like an easy way to like show, okay, I know this is how you think about lawyers, but what if there was another way? My client, he took it a step further, and he was like, forget the brick wall. Let's put the Grim Reaper right at the end of the ski jump, and just like show that that legal is this like really ominous presence that comes in and kills the day. And so that's what we went with. And now he shares that constantly, and it immediately it kind of disarms his buyer and says, okay, this guy gets that legal's kind of a buzzkill.
He gets me.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Whoa. Stop. He freaking gets me. All these other guys that came in here, they told me all of these things, and it was a lot of blah, blah, blah. This one gets me.
Right.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. And as deeply as you can connect to that emotional moment, the better. And it's funny because this then starts to transcend. These aren't necessarily like, some of what I create for folks are true like consulting frameworks, like there's value in that IP, but these visual metaphors in particular almost serve as like billboards, like funny billboards that you would see on the side of the road. They're not quite memes, because I don't think that they're meant to engage a person and pique some curiosity. They're not just meant to be a nice chuckle and move on. There's a place for that, but no, for visual metaphors, you really want to like get as close to the heart of the overwhelming emotion that person is thinking about when they feel the need to call.
What's going through my head? The closest analogy I can think of to this is it's a political cartoon. Same kind of an idea. When you see that, you say, yeah, well, that's exactly it. It's kind of a dying art. So this is interesting. My grandfather was a cartoonist for the Houston Post, now defunct. There used to be 2 large newspapers in Houston. Before everything was a photograph, a lot of things were cartoons. And so his whole career and he wasn't a political cartoonist. He actually did he did it all over, all the drawings for the whole paper. And so we have all these drawings from his career, and a lot of them just like kind of stop you, and you think, yeah, that's it. You get it. There's not a lot of question about it. Okay, sidetrack. I want to divert from this a little bit because I have to know. Were you an artist as a kid? Like, how do you, like, that's not a normal consultant skill.
No, I was not an artist as a kid. And honestly, if you look at the drawings around my desk, I mean, they're really
okay. So maybe you're not a great drawer, but there is a level of creativity here that is unique.
Well, and interesting, we started off talking about like BCG at the very beginning. When I look backwards, I do see a through line of visualization. So I think when you're in consulting early in your career, it's like, I know I was taught to, you think in slides, you think about like not having too much text on it. Like how can I display this visually as opposed to verbally? That kind of, I was then an analyst at Carnival, and then it was like, okay, well, you don't just show spreadsheets. You need to say, how am I going to visualize this so that our stakeholders understand what's happening? When I was doing project and product management, it's like, how can I visualize things to get everyone else on board with what I'm trying to get moving? So there was that trend. I think, I don't know, yeah, somewhere down the line, I did have this kind of like, I don't know, realization that I can see metaphors in a way that maybe it doesn't come so naturally to other people. But I don't know. I do think these visual representations are becoming more and more important, especially when you think about, I'm going to have to take it to Gen AI, right? It's like you think of all the stuff that's just being thrown out there, all this slop that's thrown out verbally, and no one's even like proofreading what they're putting, or like kind of fact checking what they're getting out of the AI. And so we're all already on guard with text type content. Visuals, yeah, you can create through AI, but I mean, I think it's still such a differentiation to go the visual route in a way that, I don't know, just text and smart posts are only going to get you so far, you know?
Okay, I have another question about this. So going back to the intellectual headshot, are you trying to get everything on one page, or are you trying to have a series of, maybe it's 3 pages, but something to step through that is predominantly visual?
I'm so glad you asked. So what comes out of the sprint is a set of 5, I call it your insights portfolio. It's a set of 5 different headshots. We work through what those should look like. What we don't want to do is try to cram too much on a page. This is meant to be instantly digestible. Okay. So kind of one idea, one visual, that rule. If you were trying to cram everything onto one, it would start to look like an infographic, which, everyone says, oh, everyone loves an infographic, but that's actually, there's a time and place for infographics. I think those are long-term authority builders, maybe lead magnets, et cetera. The headshots that I built for folks are very specific uses. They're for marketing. They're for like to draw attention. They're to accelerate your sales conversations. And then in some cases, if they're frameworks, then they can even structure the delivery of your work with the client. But long-term authority building, or I don't know, I don't see in the work that I do, you don't want super dense or super intense
it
visuals.
would interrupt the point of which is to stop someone, reframe something in an unexpected way, and then draw out thoughts and insight versus inattention. Yeah. How are you seeing people use them? Let's go back to the this fractional general counsel. Like, how has he used this in his practical life and work?
Yeah. So so first off, he came to me because he is just a consummate writer. He writes and writes and writes. And he came to me, he was like, I write all these newsletters, nobody reads them. My website is full of text and nobody cares. Like, help me visualize some of this. And so that's what we went. So now he puts them on his website, he sends them out. He's thinking about turning his newsletter into a book, and we're talking about potentially illustrating that. So there's that. I have another client. She's a fractional CMO. We created some for her. She's starting to share them on LinkedIn, write kind of LinkedIn newsletters around each visual that help go a little bit deeper. So then you have the interesting combination of both the headshot that you can take away right away, and then if you want more, then you can read further. So she's starting to create a series of those for myself. And the reason I even like thought to even go this direction is I think the biggest use is pulling these out at the right time during a sales conversation. Just really can reframe everything. When I was selling more like coaching type services, I put together this very simple diagram about the different types of consultants and how you could deploy yourself. And I put that out there, and it became a language that people saw in my newsletter, booked a call and said, I think I want to be like this fixer type, but at some point I want to move to an advisor. And so it just it framed the conversation. And those are things that I continue to pull out on sales calls as I need to.
Well, this has been super interesting, Wes. How does if someone wants to work with you, where can they learn more about your services and how that works?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's super easy. You can just go to intellectualheadshots.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn. Last name is Wheless, Wheless. Yeah, connect with me or DM me there.
Yeah, I think there's so many people out there who have business and wanting to grow their business, particularly those who are not slide heavy consultants. Let's just say that. Those of us that are slide heavy, we've got some level of this skill, but to your point around a CMO or a fractional general counsel, I know you've worked with economic consultants in the past as well, people involved on the fundraising side of private equity, like they certainly could benefit from this. And I think if there's one thing to take away, it's that less is more, and that being different, unique, and clear in the problem that you uniquely and clearly solve is one of the most effective things you can do to make this a career. Thank you. And I have not seen anyone else that's providing a service like this. So I think it is quite unique and quite interesting to people. So I would encourage those of you who are intrigued by this to head over to intellectualheadshot.com and see for yourself. So thank you, Wes, so much. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Good to see you.
That's it.